So in our previous video, we made pie dough. Now we're gonna learn how to blind bake a crust. What we're gonna need is about 8 to 9 ounces of our pie crust. There we go. Now you can save the rest of this for later. I'm gonna actually make a peach pie with it after this. So this one I'll just set aside and put into the cooler for later. So I always keep a little bowl of flour to the side, and that's just so nothing gets stuck to this area. I normally feel around too just to make sure that nothing got stuck to it when I was making my pie dough after I cleaned it up. Another reason one of these is really nice. So I'm gonna dust very lightly with flour. And again, I'm not kneading it. I'm literally, I call them my paws because I do this with my hands. I don't use my fingers. I don't make a flat fist. I literally make kind of like a little animal paw if you think about it. And I just push it into a little circle. And that's all that I'm doing. I'm not trying to develop any more gluten. I just want to be able to roll this out evenly. Now, when you're rolling out pie crust, you want it to be an inch bigger around than your pie tin. So I'm gonna put this down after I've rolled it out and ensure that I have an inch around. I'm gonna dust the top a little bit with flour. Just keep in mind, the more flour you put down, the more flour your crust is gonna pick up, and that's not something that you want. It's gonna create a drier crust, and that's with anything. If you're making croissant doughs, biscuit doughs, anything that you have to roll out, the more flour on here, the more flour in your dough. It's gonna pick it up. It's just a natural thing for dough. And again, what we do with our rolling pin is not roll back and forth. That's just creating friction, and it's gonna warm up your dough and work in more gluten. We don't want that. You're gonna press down, pull towards yourself, press down in the middle, push outward. And I like to move mine around. It's just something that my grandma taught me, that you always just kind of move it around to ensure that it doesn't stick to the bottom. And it'll give you a little bit more of an even crust. Very gently though, I'm not pulling it. And don't be afraid to apply pressure. And I can see it's getting a little bit sticky on top. So I'm gonna put a little bit more flour, and then I kind of just feel with my fingers. And once it gets to this stage, it starts to get a little bit thin, and you don't want to have it stick or stretch it out. So I use my scraper and make sure it's not stuck. And the reason that I measured out how much dough is because if I use that whole thing and I roll it out to what I want, I'm gonna end up with like a thick dough, and I'm gonna think that's okay because I'm like, okay, I got enough. This helps you ensure that you're getting the right size for your pan and that you're getting it thin enough. Because while a thicker pie crust is delicious, it's not gonna lend itself if it's too thick. And now I need to dust underneath. And when I do that, I just fold over my dough. It's been rested, so it folds over without ripping. I can do this and it'll stay. That's how I can tell that my dough is nicely rested. And I can see that it's a little bit thicker over here. Now, I'm no expert at rolling things out. Not gonna lie, I got a little bit used to having an industrial sheeter where I work, so a lot of times I just run things through that and I can make 7, 8 pies at a time. So this is really something that I only do a few times a year when I'm teaching and for holidays at home. So I am definitely not an expert. But I can help you make a decent pie. And so see, I can pick this up and it's pliable. Normally for me, I fold it like this to get it onto my pie tin, but I'm gonna check the shape first. So when I put it over here, I can see it's 1 inch on this side, but over here I need a little bit more help. And you want to try to keep it a pretty even shape. Mine has a couple little bumps and bruises on the sides, but that's all going to get cut off once I place it in my pie shell. Sometimes you'll get one of these that'll crack all the way through, and that could mean a couple of things. It could mean that your pie dough is too dry and it hasn't been folded enough, so it's not coming together. But sometimes it could just be the way that it was rolled out or the way that it was cut. And if that happens to you, my suggestion is to get a little bit of vodka, rub it with your finger right here, and you'll literally just press and it'll seal together. You can do it with water also, but the reason that we use vodka is it bakes out in the cooler or in the oven, and it's not adding any extra moisture. And that's the beautiful thing about it. I know a lot of people who make their actual pie dough with vodka instead of water, and that's getting them an even crisper crust. I've yet to try that, so I might try that in a few weeks when we make another pie. But for now, vodka is my cure-all when it comes to fixing scrapes and cuts on my pie dough. So now I'm just gonna ensure that it's not stuck. And if I put this here, you can see that it's 1 inch all the way around, and you wanna keep it in the center. So just to ensure that my pie dough doesn't stick and it's easy to get out, I'm gonna give this a little bit of a spray. And I'm just spraying very lightly. And now I just fold this into quarters, 'cause that's the easiest way for me to do it. I set it in here at the quarter mark. And just gently unwrap it. Now the most important thing is that I get this into my corners. And I can see that I've offset myself a little bit, so I'm just gonna adjust. And now I'm using my fingertips. I'm not digging into it with nails or anything. I'm just gently lifting up and pressing it into the corners. What pie dough, sweet dough, all of these kind of things love to do is sink. So if my container is like this, and inside of my container, my pie dough is like this, and it's not hitting those corners perfectly, it's gonna cook and it's gonna sink like this. I don't know if you guys have ever practiced making pie dough and your lip of your container is up here and all of a sudden your pie dough is sinking down here. That's because you're stressing your dough out. If you stretch it to get it in here, it's gonna relax and sink in. If you have it like this and it's not perfectly pushed into that corner, it's gonna sink down. This way it won't sink down. And another way to ensure that is blind baking. So I'm just making sure that it's relaxed into all those corners and it has enough give to chill. And that's what you want. A lot of times too, if you know you haven't mixed it enough, if you see butter chunks, and I don't have any butter chunks in here, which is really great. So you can see that it's starting to get that sharper edge, and I'm just letting it do its own thing by sinking in, and I'm just lightly pressing around. Now here you can take your knife or you can use your finger. I've always just naturally used my finger against the edge. So if you can see here, I'm just taking my finger and pressing down this way. Not stretching my dough out by any means. I'm just using the edge to cut my dough. Now this dough is still usable. I try not to get any excess flour and I try not to knead it. I just kind of will smash it together, and if I need extra dough, that's where I'll use it. So once you've trimmed your edges, what you're gonna be left with is just a clean pie crust. Now we're gonna get to the blind baking part. So what I've got is a aluminum shell, just like the one we just used. I'm just lightly spraying the bottom of it. And here's why they call it blind baking. Gonna set this in here, just like that. Not gonna press on it, I'm just gonna put it in there just like that, and I can't see my crust. all I can see is a tiny little rim. We're gonna turn it upside down, put it on our sheet pan. Then we're gonna take another sheet pan and put it right over it. If you don't have another sheet pan and you have like a baking rack, a cupcake rack, anything that can lay flat on top of your pie tin, that's what you want. So you're just gonna lay this on top. We're gonna put it in the oven at 375. I wanna say it'll probably take at least 20 minutes depending on where you wanna go with it. I don't want mine to get all the way to a dark brown color where I'm gonna make like a banana cream pie. I'm gonna make a pumpkin pie, so I want it more of like par baked, you'd say, so just a light golden color. And this is where it's called blind baking because you're baking totally blind. You can't see it. So once we pull this out of the oven, the only thing I'll see is a little bit of a rim, and that's how I'll be able to tell, okay, it's light golden. I'm gonna wanna check it out. And I'll show you what that looks like when I pull it back out of the oven. This is a good technique to know because your pie will come out perfect every time. Your quiche shells will come out perfect every time. If this is doing the work for you, your pie's not gonna be able to slide down because it's upside down. So it's just gonna take on the shape of the pie tin that's in there, which is great. And this, again, is a recipe that we use for any cream pies. So if you wanna bake it a little bit less, you can do a pumpkin or a pecan pie. If you want to bake it a little bit more and make it like a dark golden, you can pull it back out and then you can fill it with pastry cream of any flavor. So like coconut cream, banana cream, lemon meringue, any of those kind of pies that contain a pre-cooked filling will go in here. And that'll give you like a really nice crisp crust. So we're going to put this in the oven. Shell out of the oven. It was in there for about 25 minutes. And again, I don't want mine to be completely baked just because I'm going to be making a pumpkin pie and it's going to go back in there for another 30 to 40 minutes and continue to bake. I just want to par bake it so that my pumpkin pie crust will be crispy. If you're doing a banana cream pie, lemon cream pie, anything more custard based where you're not going to throw it back in the oven, definitely cook this a little bit longer. I waited until my edges were a little bit golden, and obviously it's cooled a little bit because I can handle it. Flip it back over, and you're able to pull this off with no problem. And then as you can see, my crust baked perfectly inside there. You can see that it's got a nice sharp edge. It literally took on the shape of the pan. And that's the beauty of blind baking, is it helps you to create this great, beautiful crust without the stress of putting anything inside of it. The only downside that I can see here is that you can't get that really pretty fluted edge or any of the fancy designs on the edge, which is fine because normally a finished pumpkin pie, when you're serving it, is gonna have whipped cream on the sides. So we're okay here. So now that I have this and it's done and cooled, I'm just gonna set it to the side. I'm gonna make a quick pumpkin pie recipe. It has 1 can of pumpkin puree. Make sure that you're grabbing the pumpkin puree and not the pumpkin pie mix because they do sell that in a can and they're right next to each other, and I've made that mistake once or twice, so you want to make sure that you're not doing that. It's 1 can, which is 16 ounces of pumpkin puree. I've got 2 eggs here, 1 can of sweetened condensed milk. 1 can is 14 ounces when it comes to sweetened condensed milk. And then I have 1 teaspoon of pumpkin spice. You don't have to buy pumpkin spice just to use it for 1 pumpkin pie if you're only going to make it once a year. You can actually make it yourself using nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon. I know everybody has their own version of it. I use for every teaspoon, I use half a teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of cloves, and a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and I feel that makes it a little bit spicier. I know some people use allspice. You can kind of play around with it and try to find a blend that you really like for yourself, or you can buy a pumpkin pie mix. So I'm just gonna sprinkle this spice in here. I'm gonna mix up my eggs. Just pour those straight in. Pumpkin pie is one of the most simple recipes to make, and it's, to me, one of the most delicious and traditional. I'm just gonna whisk these together. I got this little whisk as a gift and it's become one of my favorite things to use because sometimes a regular size whisk just doesn't cut it. Like, it can't get in all the little corners, and when you're making a small batch of something, I just feel like this is perfect. So now I'm going to pour my condensed milk in here. I'm just going to use one of these little scrapers to make sure that I get everything out of that can. I kind of just started off by folding, but this recipe is literally dump everything in a bowl and whisk it together real nicely. Once everything's evenly blended, I switch back to my spatula just so I can scrape the whole bottom of the bowl. And that's it. You have your filling. Super simple. And it looks like a lot, but this is going to make us one 9-inch pie. So this is going to go into the oven on a sheet pan. I always like to set all my pies right on a sheet pan because if I move this around, it's kind of flimsy, whereas if I grab a sheet pan, it's a lot more sturdy. I'm going to put it on the lower shelf so it continues to bake the bottom, but it doesn't scorch any of my nice filling. The thing about pumpkin pie is you want it to bake thoroughly, but you don't want to over bake it. When you see that a pie is cracked, it's because it was over baked, so the custard pulls apart. What you're looking for is to be able to do this, and it's all going to jiggle as one, kind of like Jell-O. It'll literally do this and stop. And that's what you want because it's going to set even more as you put it in the cooler and you let it go. So I'm going to put it on the lower rack on a sheet pan, and I'm going to start it at 425 for 15 minutes. Then I'm going to lower my oven to 350 and let it bake the rest of the way. So this is my finished pumpkin pie. It hasn't cooled yet, so I'm not going to cut it right now. It'll probably take about 3 hours in the cooler for it to completely cool and for you to get a nice clean cut on it. It was in the oven for 15 minutes at 425, and then I lowered my oven to 350 and I let it bake for another 30 minutes. And if I hit it, you can see that it jiggles, but it all stays together. I have no cracks on the surface. And my crust has become this beautiful golden color. And that's exactly what you're looking for. If you start to get an overbaked crust and you're seeing that it's starting to burn, you can always cover the edges with foil. And that way it'll stop the tops from crisping, but your pie will be able to continue to cook. So once this is done, I'm gonna go pop it in the cooler for about, I wanna say 3 hours. And then we'll cut this and we'll see a nice, beautiful slice of pumpkin pie. So once my pumpkin pie came out of the oven, I put it into the cooler for around 3 hours now. I'd say that that's about the minimum time for you to keep it in the cooler before serving it. I prefer to leave it overnight, but just for the purpose of this video, I'm pulling it out now to show you guys. It's set completely. I can touch it and it's pretty firm, but with a little bit of give. Normally, I'd probably dress it up with some whipped cream and maybe sprinkle some cinnamon around the edges just to make it look completely finished. And that's our just plain old-fashioned pumpkin pie, and we used our blind baked pie shell. So now I'm gonna cut a slice of our pumpkin pie. For me, the first slice of anything, a cake, a pie, is always the hardest to get. But always make sure that you're using a pretty sharp knife and be determined with your cuts. Don't hesitate. That's something that's always really helped me. And always, always clean your knife. It makes it a lot easier to cut into it again. So now we're gonna attempt to get our first slice out. There we go. As you can see, because we par baked our crust, you can see that it's got a nice layer right here that's crisp and golden underneath. And if you didn't par bake your crust, you're gonna get a little bit of a soggy crust and it's not gonna get that beautiful coloring. And you wanna keep it so that it's a nice custard. And this pumpkin pie is beautiful, it's ready to eat. Yeah.